In the last update, the model progressed to include the foundation support steelwork and a section of the tower. The slewing unit had also been modelled, and there was also a cab support platform. Also built was the upper slewing ring support A-frame. Now, one issue that was becoming apparent for the model was the heavy loads that were going to be placed on the slewing unit, and therefore could it hold the loads in a secure and stable fashion. The slewing unit had been built in two separate parts, with the top and bottom sections being separable. Here you can see the blue main bearing of the top part, and it was sitting on a roller race in the bottom part. Because of uncertainty about the stability of this arrangement, it's been decided to use some Lazy Susan roller rings. These are engineered components, and a completely new slewing unit has been built. If we look underneath, you can see one of the Lazy Susan bearings, and in fact two of them have been used and they are slightly separated. Luckily, the fixing holes in these rings is exactly suitable for fixing two Meccano spacings. So, as is so often the case, there's been a ton of rework done on this Meccano model. A big advantage of these rings is that the slewing unit is now one complete piece, and so it's just like the real crane. They're also extremely rigid and strong bearings. There's also another advantage because the first slewing unit didn't have any way through for a man to get from the tower to the cab, and again the new design is much more like the real crane, because in theory you can now have an access route up from the tower. So it's all an improvement so far. The rebuild has had other consequences, so ignore the brass feet at the bottom, they're only temporary. And the bottom half of the unit has been made slightly differently so that it's more accessible if you need to get in there for any maintenance reason. Another consequential change is the spacing between the upper and lower parts of the slewing unit. The gap was larger on the old unit and it's thinner now, and the silver strip looks better than the coloured one used earlier. There's also another significant change which is not quite so obvious, and that is that side on, the upper part is one hole wider. That geometry change affected the cab support platform, so that's been reconstructed for a changed dimension, but also the fixings for the A-frame are further apart on the new design. So that means that the A-frame has also had to be rebuilt to get the correct dimensions. And you can see now that the A-frame would no longer fit on the old slewing unit because it's a bit too wide. Anyway, why do something once when you can do it 2, 3, 4 or 5 times? Other improvements to the A-frame include strengthened tops, because they're going to take very high loads. Also working well now are sliding bolts for fitting the counter jib, and these now work in the same way as the real crane has them. So, comparing to the real crane, the slewing unit and the A-frame has been built. And the next part to tackle is what Terex calls the counter jib. This large piece supports the winches and also the swinging counterweight. And here is the counter jib that has been prepared earlier. On the left is the connection to the A-frame, and above that will be connections for the jib and also the large counter jib A-frame. As you can see, the main beams are very large, and at the back are more supports for the counter jib A-frame. Looking down from above, the main structure that joins the two beams has been modelled, and this has all been interpreted by working from photos of the real crane. Looking from underneath, there are some other things to note. There are two support legs which are used when this part is being transported, and behind that are some heavily built connections. These will be for the support struts and swinging counterweight. The A-frame connections are also strongly built. So this is the main counterweight structure, and it's a heavy part, and the giant hand crane carefully lowers it onto the weighbridge. and it's about £7 4 ounces or 3.3 kilograms. To mount the A-frame, we're going to use a temporary support, and this is coloured blue because it's not part of the real crane. We'll just proceed and attach this to the back of the counter jib. Once that's done, we can then use more giant hand cranes to lift the counter jib up. And now you can see that the support frame is just there to hold the rear end up. Getting all of the geometry right for the model has been quite a challenge so far, particularly as we are trying to model the real crane quite accurately. The counter jib connection to the A-frame carefully gets lowered into place, and just like on the real crane, you have to get the alignment of everything correct. At least this isn't being done high up in the air. Once it's all lined up properly, the securing pins nicely slot into place. And then on the real crane, the counter jib is held up by two struts. So again, these are heavily modelled parts made out of angle girders, and there's a pinned connection at the rear of the bottom of the A-frame. With that done, we can then pin the other end of the strut. The clearances here are all tight, so you have to miss the support leg. And to secure the connection, we'll use what the Meccano system calls a pivot bolt. On the real crane, sometimes they have to use sledgehammers to hammer pins in, but we'll try and avoid that if we can. With the first one fixed, we can then add the second one. And that gives us the counter jib fully mounted. Of course, this is the main structure and doesn't include any of the walkways that have to be fitted along the sides. And the big winch units get fitted on top. There's one other geometric check to do, and if we undo the struts at the bottom, then they should be able to fold up underneath the counter jib for transport. And that works well, and it was also tricky to achieve. So here's another look at the real crane, and there's still tons to do on the model. Now you might be thinking I must be mad to make this model so big, but I've got no hesitation in telling you you're absolutely right.